Jewish noises!
So we're on to chapter 1. You can start reading chapter 1, I guess.
Alright, you ready to see how radically different it is?
Yeah.
Part 1, on the prejudices of philosophers. The will to truth, which is still going to tempt us as many a hazardous enterprise, that celebrated veracity of which all philosophers have hitherto spoken with reverence. What questions this will to truth has already set before us? What strange, wicked, questionable questions. Yes, questionable questions. It is already a long story, yet does it not seem as if it has only just begun? Is it any wonder... Almost started singing that song. We should at last grow distrustful, lose our patience, turn impatiently away. That the Sphinx should teach us to ask questions. Who really is it there here that questions us? What really is it that wants the truth? We did indeed pause for a long time before the question of origin of this will, until finally we came to a complete halt before an even more fundamental question. We asked after the value of this will. Granted, we want truth. Why not rather untruth? And uncertainty, even ignorance. The problem of value of truth stepped before us. Or was it we who stepped before this problem? Which of us is Oedipus here? What? Which of us Sphinx? It seems, a rendezvous of questions. By the way, I named my Fallout character in this fucking run Friedrich Nietzsche because that's what we're reading.
That's funny.
A rendezvous of questions and question marks. And would you believe it, it has finally almost come to seem to us that this problem has never before been posed. That we have been, for the first to see, to fix our eye on it, to hazard it. For there is a hazard in it, and perhaps there exists no greater hazard. I think people have always looked for truth, it's just there hasn't always been documentation, and philosophers, as a fucking career and, calling in life wasn't always a thing. I think people have always sought truth to some degree, you know what I mean?
I mean, literally, the job of a philosopher basically is to question the truth. Something that separates, Ayn Rand from traditional philosophers is, that she is more of, a guide to truth than it is, a philosophy in the same sense that, these other philosophers... Most philosophers are, subjectivists.
Right. By the way, Corbin, is your book organized the same as mine? Because that was section 1 of part 1, and then section 2 starts right after that. Is it organized in these little subsections like mine is?
Well, yeah, it's chapter 1, but this is a part 1, and then there's a 2 right after this.
But the chapters, or whatever, are really short. Because, part 1 is the bigger one, and then just 1 of part 1 is what I just read. So now I'll read 2 since the preface was longer.
It's similarly organized.
Okay, I just want to make sure so that we can kind of keep up with the same place, right?
Now we'll be on to the second part of it.
Right. So I'll go here since the preface was longer than what I just read. How could something originate in its antithesis? Truth and error, for example? Or will to truth in will to deception? Or the unselfish act in self-interest? Or the pure radiant gaze of the sage in covetousness? Such organization is impossible. He who dreams of it is a fool. Indeed, worse than a fool. The things of highest value must have another origin of their own. They cannot be derivable from this transitory, seductive, deceptive, mean little world. From this confusion of the desire and illusion, in the womb of being, rather in the intransitory, in the hidden God, in the thing in itself, that is where their cause must lie, and nowhere else. This mode of judgment constitutes the typical prejudice by which metaphysicians of all ages can be recognized. This mode of evaluation stands in the background of all their logical procedures. It is on account of this, their faith, that they concern themselves with their knowledge, with something that is solemnly baptized the truth. The fundamental faith of the metaphysicians in the faith and antithetical values it has not occurred to even the most cautious of them to pause and doubt here on the threshold where however it was most needful they should. Even if they had vowed themselves to de omnibus dubitandum, for it may be doubted, firstly, whether there exists any antithesis at all, and secondly, whether these popular evaluations and value antitheses, which metaphysicians have set their seal, are not perhaps merely foreground valuations, merely provisional perspectives, perhaps moreover the perspectives of a hole and corner. Perhaps from below it is as it were frog perspectives. What? Frog perspectives? To borrow an expression employed by painters. That's a thing painters said? With all the value that may adhere to the truth, the genuine, the selfless, it could be possible that a higher and more fundamental value for all life have been ascribed to appearance.
I think the concept of selfless action is actually an impossibility.
Yeah, I think it is impossible to act completely without regard to your own self-interest.
Like, that's what I think, that's one thing I like about Max Stirner. Like, Ayn Rand talks about how selfishness is a virtue, but Max Stirner talks about how selfishness is literally an escapable aspect of human nature, that all decisions we make are invariably guided by selfishness, and that there's no way to not act in selfishness. Like, and that actually I think is very true. For me, it's like that selfishness and cupidity.
Yeah, the genuine, the selfless. It could be possible that a higher and more fundamental value for all life might have to be ascribed to appearance, to the will to deception, to selfishness, and to appetite. So instead of stupidity, it says appetite in mine.
Well, it's like cupidity.
Oh, cupidity. Like fucking Cupid?
Yeah, I don't know what the hell that means.
It might even be possible that what constitutes the value of those goods and honored things resides precisely in their being artfully related, knotted, like a white chick with a dog, and crocheted to the wicked, apparently antithetical things, perhaps even in their being essentially identical with them. Perhaps, but who is willing to concern himself with such dangerous perhapses? For that we have to await the arrival of a new species of philosopher, one which possesses tastes and inclinations opposite to and different from those of its predecessors. Philosophers of the dangerous perhaps in every sense. And to speak in all seriousness, I see such new philosophers arising. And that's the end of that section in mine. Here's the thing with that. I do think it is good to question everything to a degree. But if that's literally all you do, you're only going to cause confusion. And I do think that there are things that are provable enough that they are objective, right? Like the physical is obviously provable. Right. Yeah. So, like, obviously,
that's like we need to separate the psychological reality from the material reality.
That too. But like, I always use the term, right, that we each have our rational and our irrational mind, right? Like, there are things that we know more or less to be true, because obviously perception is flawed. But I reject the notion that it's impossible to know, because that's a fucking retarded commie take. I think that with our minds having rational, like there's the ones where we're going on logic, reason, things that are provable, observable, things like that, and objective. And then the irrational is where we get into speculative things, right? Like, certain elements of philosophy fall into either camp, just depending on what element we're talking about. If we get into the minutia of it, morality is kind of split between both, because, obviously I believe in objective morality, which obviously is kind of the point of this book that Nietzsche fucking didn't.
Yeah, but he still separated morality in a very similar way as.
Well, yeah, he just called it different things.
Yeah, like he believes like this sort of like a lot of philosophers, instead of believing in good and evil, they believe in order and chaos, and then they choose to separate things in that way. Nietzsche, Jung, and like a lot of psychologists, and because Nietzsche basically was the original like Nietzsche spawned the field of psychology. Like all the field of psychology was based on Nietzsche originally.
Yeah. Do you want me to do section 3, or do you want to do section 3?
I can do this part. Having kept a sharp eye on philosophers and having read between their lines long enough, I now say to myself that the greater part of conscious thinking must be counted among the instinctive functions, and it is so even in the case of philosophical thinking. One has here to learn anew, as one learned anew about heredity and innateness. As little as the act of birth comes into consideration in the whole process and procedure of heredity, just as little is being conscious opposed to the instinctive in any decisive sense. The greater part of the conscious thinking of a philosopher is secretly influenced by his instincts and forced into definite channels. And behind all logic and its seeming sovereignty of movement, there are valuations, or to speak more plainly, psychological demands for the maintenance of a definite mode of life. For example, that the certain is worth more than the uncertain, that illusion is less valuable than truth. Such valuations, in spite of their regulative importance for us, might notwithstanding be only superficial valuations, special kinds of naysayery. I don't know how to say that word. Naysayery, such as may be necessary for the maintenance of beings such as ourselves. Supposing in effect that man is not just the measure of things. The falseness of an opinion is not for us any objection to it. It is here, perhaps, that our new language sounds most strangely. The question is, how far in opinion is life-furthering, life-preserving, species-preserving, perhaps species-rearing, and we are fundamentally inclined to maintain that the falsest opinions to which the synthetic judgments a priori belong are the most indispensable to us, that without a recognition of logical fictions, without a comparison of reality with the purely imagined world of the absolute and immutable, without a constant counterfeiting of the world by means of numbers, man could not live, that the renunciation of false opinions would be a renunciation of life, a negation of life. To recognize untruth as a condition of life, that is certainly to impugn the traditional ideas of value in a dangerous manner, and a philosophy which ventures to do so has thereby alone placed itself beyond good and evil. Hey, he said it.
Yeah, he said the title!
That which causes philosophers to be regarded half distrustfully and half mockingly is not the oft-repeated discovery how innocent they are, how often and easily they make mistakes, and, page flip, lose their way, in short, how childish and childlike they are. But how childish and childlike they are. But that there is not enough honest dealing with them, whereas they all raise a loud and virtuous outcry when the problem of truthfulness is even hinted at in the remotest manner. They all pose as though their real opinions had been discovered and attained through the self-evolving of a cold, pure, divinely indifferent dialectic. In contrast to all sorts of mystics who fairer and foolisher talk of inspiration, whereas, in fact, a prejudiced proposition, idea, or suggestion, which is generally their heart's desire abstracted and refined, is defended by them with arguments sought out after the event. They are all advocates who do not wish to be regarded as such, generally astute defenders also of their prejudices, which they dub truths, and very far from having the conscience which bravely admits this to itself, very far from having the good taste of the courage which goes so far as to let this be understood. perhaps to warn friend or foe, or in cheerful confidence and self-ridicule, the spectacle of the tartuffery of old Kant. It's Kant, right? I think I've heard it said both ways.
I would say Kant, but yeah, I'm not. I'm certainly no expert on that. Oh, I'm very easy. No wonder this is so fucking easy.
Equally stiff and decent, with which he entices us into the dialectic by ways that lead more correctly mislead to his categorical imperative, makes us fastidious one smile, we who find no small amusement in spying out the subtle tricks of old moralists and ethical preachers, or still more so the hocus-pocus in mathematical form, by means of which Spinoza has, as it were, clad his philosophy in mail and mask. In fact, the love of his wisdom to translate the term fairly and squarely, in order thereby to strike terror at once into the heart of the assailant who should dare to cast a glance on that invincible maiden, that Pallas Athene. How much of personal timidity and vulnerability does this masquerade of sickly recluse betray? Would you like to read 6?
Okay.
Or say anything about what was just read?
So, am I correct in saying he says that we shouldn't deny false opinions? Is that a thing he said?
Well,
or is he saying that recognizing false opinions is just as important as recognizing truth?
It seems to me that he's calling like a lot of these philosophers
okay,
foolish.
So he is being critical of that notion then.
Yeah,
okay.
Like he's being critical of these philosophers because he's saying that their conceptions of, I think he disagrees with their conceptions of reality.
Gotcha. Yeah, because obviously with this approach, with us reading it, obviously, like, it's a little bit harder for me to pay attention with, number one, because I'm playing a game, number two, because we're also discussing it, and you're reading it, and then we're switching back and forth, so, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But I will, like, Jordan Peterson, like, obviously agrees, like, Jordan Peterson's, like, a nut for Nietzsche, like, that's why, like, he literally says the thing where he's like, up yours, woke moralists, because he doesn't like, because he's a moral relativist.
Oh, that's gay.
Yeah.
Because Nietzsche is, like, a big moral relativist, right?
Yeah.
But you said we're on 6, right?
Although, I think, like, Nietzsche's just kind of, like when he says moral relativism, like, he's still separating things into a duality as a substitute for morality, so I don't think he's even really far off from just believing in a sort of objective morality. I think he's just sort of, like, a stickler.
I like how we're, like, just reading shit like Follow the Leader does. And, like, discussing.
Yeah.
Although we're not farting up a tub, so, you know.
Yeah, we need to do fart tub streams.
It has gradually become clear to me what every great philosophy has hitherto been. Yeah, okay, you're right. Yeah, he was clearly phrasing it as this is what every philosophy is. So I think I just kind of forgot that because, because of the way we've been taking turns reading and, like, I don't know. Like, I can retain stuff if I am sitting in complete silence reading it on my own for an extended period of time.
Well, the thing about Nietzsche is he's, like, you have to actually think a lot about what he's saying. Like, Nietzsche's not an easy philosopher to get into.
Right. Anyway, it has gradually become clear to me what every great philosophy has hitherto been, a confession on the part of its author, and a kind of involuntary and unconscious memoir. Moreover, that the moral, or immoral, intentions in every philosophy have every time constituted the real germ of life, out of which the entire plant has grown. To explain how a philosopher's most remote metaphysical assertions have actually been arrived at, it is always well and wise to ask oneself first, what morality does he, aim at? I, accordingly, do not believe a drive to knowledge to be the father of philosophy, but the author, but that another drive has. Here as elsewhere, only employed knowledge, and false knowledge, as a tool. But anyone who looks at the basic drives of mankind to see what extent they may in precisely this connection have come into play as inspirational spirits, or demons and kobolds, will discover that they have all, at some time or another, practiced philosophy, and that each one of them would be only too glad to present itself as the ultimate goal of existence, and as to the legitimate master of all the other drives. For every drive is tyrannical, and it is as such that it tries to philosophize. In the case of scholars, to be sure, it is the case in the case of really scientific men, trademark, things may be different, better, if you will. There may really exist something like a drive to knowledge there, some little independent clockwork, which, when wound up, works bravely on without any of the scholar's other drives playing any essential part. The scholar's real interests, therefore, generally lie in quite another direction. Perhaps in his family, or in making money, or in politics. It is indeed almost a matter of indifference whether his little machine is set up in this region of science, or that whether the promising young worker, call them workers, makes himself into a good philologist, or a specialist in fungus, or a chemist. He is not characterized by becoming this or that. In the philosopher, on the contrary, there is nothing whatever impersonal, and above all, his morality bears decided and decisive testimony to who he is. That is to say, to the order of rank, the innermost drives of his nature stand in relative to one another. Now we're on 7. How malicious philosophers can be. I know of nothing more venomous than the joke of Epicurus allowed himself to make against Plato and the Platonists. He called them Jesus Christ. He didn't call them Jesus Christ. Dionysio Kalakis. We're gonna say that. That's how I'm gonna say it. Fuck it. The literal and foreground meaning of the word is flatterers of Dionysus. Dinamite! You know, the fucking squirrel from Hoodwinked? That is to say, tyrants, hangers-on, and lick spittles. In addition, however, it is as much to say as they are all actors. Actors. You know, and it zooms in on SpongeBob's lips. There is nothing more genuine about them, for Dionysio was a popular term for an actor, and the latter meaning
Dionysio Colax is how I'd say it.
Dionysio Colax, yeah, that makes sense. It's just a stupid word, like I don't like it. These are just like words for people that believe in like a Dionysian philosophy. Right.
I mean, I think there's easier ways to word it, but...
Right, no, it's not that I necessarily have a problem with it, it's just... There's so many fucking vowels in weird spots with it, you know what I mean?
Well, it is a translation of German.
Yeah, well, and I don't think these words are German, I think these words are Greek. Dionysio Colax was a popular term for an actor, and the latter meaning is really a piece of malice that Epicurus discharged at Plato. He was annoyed by the grandiose manner, the mise en scene, of which Plato and his pupils were masters, of which Epicurus was not a master. He, the old school teacher from Samos, you know, the chick from Metroid, no, that's Samus, who sat hidden in his little garden at Athens. The garden is looking very homosexual this morning, and wrote 300 books. Who knows? Perhaps out of the rage at Plato and ambitious envy of him, it took a century for Greece to find out who this homosexual garden god, it doesn't say homosexual, I'm adding that in, of course, Epicurus had been. Did it find out? Alright, 8 is really short. In every philosophy, there is a point at which the philosopher's conviction appears. On the scene, or to put it in the words of an ancient mystery, advenivat asinus pulcher et fortissimus.
And then you fucking, like, summon, like, some kind of demon reading this.
Right?
You desire to live according to nature, oh, you noble Stoics. What fraud of words. Okay, he's gonna shit on Stoicism, I guess. Imagine to yourselves a being like nature, boundlessly extravagant, boundlessly indifferent, without purpose or consideration, without pity or justice, at once fruitful and barren, or consideration, without pity or just... Wait, I just fucking read the same line twice. And uncertain, imagine to yourselves indifference as a power. How could you live in accordance with such indifference? To live is not that just endeavoring to be otherwise than this nature, is not living valuing, preferring, being unjust, being limited, endeavoring to be different. And granted that your imperative, living according to nature, means actually the same as living according to life. How could you do differently? Why should you make a principle out of what you yourselves are and must be? In reality, however, it is quite otherwise with you. While you pretend to read with rapture the canon of your law in nature, you want something quite the contrary, you extraordinary stage players and self-deluders. In your pride, you wish to dictate your morals and ideals to nature herself, and to incorporate them therein. You insist that it shall be nature according to the Stoa, and would like everything to be made after your own image, as a vast, eternal glorification and generalism of Stoicism. Like, all the stuff he's saying, like, he's acting like it's in a negative context, but it all sounds good to me. With all your love for truth, you have forced yourselves so long, so persistently, and with such hypnotic rigidity to see nature falsely, that is to say, stoically, that you are... Okay, falsely, he's saying falsely and stoically.
Yeah, he's saying falsely, stoically, hardly different.
Yeah, he's gonna be a prick. That you are no longer able to see it otherwise, and to crown all, some unfathomable superciliousness.
Let me see. Where, what's the word?
Super. I don't know if you would pronounce the C as a K or a S.
We're still on 9, right? Or are you on 10?
Superciliousness. I'm on 9. It's just a long fucking thing. Unfathomable superciliousness gives you the bedlamite hope. The bedlamite hope that because you are able to tyrannize over yourselves.
So superciliousness or whatever it is isn't in mine, so I can't help you there.
Superciliousness.
Superciliousness. Super silly.
Yeah. I'm gonna assume it's
It's probably superciliousness.
We're smart boys. Gives you the bedlamite hope that because you are able to tyrannize over yourselves. Well, I honestly, I'm gonna have to fucking, like... The thing is, like, at some point I should probably write down a lot of the philosophers he mentions in this, so that I can read them and, like, understand more about what he's criticizing. But I mean, when he's talking about Stoicism, I overall get what he means, because I know about Stoicism. And when he's critiquing Plato, I understand, but certain things, obviously, I'm not going to get, because I haven't read the same books he has.
Right.
That because you are able to tyrannize over yourselves, Stoicism is self-tyranny. Nature will also allow herself to be tyrannized over. Is not the Stoic a part of nature? But this is an old and everlasting story. What happened in old times with the Stoics still happens today. As soon as ever a philosophy begins to believe in itself, it always creates the world in its own image. It cannot do otherwise. Philosophy is this tyrannical impulse itself, the most spiritual will to power, the will to creation of the world, the will to the causa prima. I mean, at least Stoics don't, like, go into, like, a fucking stage of fucking insanity because they question everything to a point where they fucking go nuts. Like, he's shitting on Stoics, but eventually he'll be shitting his pants.
But will he shit his pants as much as Carl Jung eating a breakfast burrito?
Oh yeah, that video. The eagerness and subtlety, I should even say craftiness, with which the problem of the real in the apparent world is dealt with at present throughout Europe, furnishes food for thought and attention, and he who hears only a will to truth in the see, that's like the thing he says though, is the will to truth, like you can will the truth in the background and nothing else, cannot certainly boast of the sharpest ears. In rare and isolated cases, it may really have happened that such a will to truth, a certain extravagant and adventurous pluck, a metaphysician's ambition of the forlorn hope, has participated therein, that which in the end always prefers a handful of certainty to a whole cartload of beautiful possibilities. There may even be puritanical fanatics of conscience who prefer to put their last trust in a sure nothing rather than in an uncertain something. But that is nihilism, and the sign of a despairing, morally wearied soul, notwithstanding the courageous bearing such a virtue may display. It seems, however, to be otherwise with stronger and livelier thinkers, who are still eager for life, in that they side against appearance and speak superciliously of perspective, and that they rank the superciliously of perspective.
That's how I'm going to say it.
Superciliously. See, when you say that, I literally can't read it any other way. You fucking me over. Of perspective. In that they rank the credibility of their own bodies about as low as the credibility of the ocular evidence that the earth stands still, and thus apparently allowing with complacency their securest possession to escape. For what does one at present believe in more firmly than in one's body? Who knows if they are not really trying to win back something which was formerly an even securer possession, something of the old domain of the faith of former times, perhaps the immortal soul, perhaps the old God, in short, ideas by which they could live better, that is to say, more vigorously and more joyously, than by modern ideas. There is distrust of these modern ideas in this mode of looking at things, a disbelief in all that has been constructed yesterday and today. There is perhaps some slight admixture of satiety, and scorn, which can no longer endure the bric-a-brac of ideas of the most varied origins, such as so-called positivism at present throws on the market a disgust of the more refined taste of the village fair, mottliness and patchiness of all these reality philosophasters, in whom there is philosophasters.
That would be my guess, yeah.
In whom there is nothing either new or true except this mottliness. Therein it seems to me that we should agree with those skeptical anti-realists and knowledge microscopists of the present day. Their instinct which repels them from modern reality is unrefuted. What do their retrograde by paths concern us? The main thing about them is not that they wish to go back, but that they wish to get away therefrom. A little more strength, swing, courage, and artistic power, and they would be off and not back.
Is he saying return to monkey?
Return to monkey? I would. That would be good.
Because, is he saying just reject modern knowledge and accept the wisdom of the past, or is he saying reject knowledge in general?
Therein, let me reread this one part. Therein it seems to me that we should agree with those skeptical anti-realists and knowledge microscopists of the present day. Their instinct which repels them from modern reality is unrefuted. What do their retrograde bypaths concern us? The main thing about them is not that they wish to go back, but that they wish to get away therefrom.
Okay, so no. What he is saying is that, reject realism and accept nonsense.
Yeah, I wonder why he ended up a gibbering idiot who shits himself.
Did he literally shit himself? Is that why you keep saying that?
He literally became retarded, so I imagine he did. That, or I'm fucking it'd be funny if a bunch of if I pissed off fans of Nietzsche or something.
Well, to be fair, I like
But,
some of what Nietzsche says. Like, it's not like we wholesale disregard it. Like, there is a lot of good stuff in here. It's just, he also says shit like, don't accept realism.
Yeah. I just think it's funny. Like, all these, like, philosophers, like, because they, like, doubt reality so much, they just end up going insane.
Ukraine, and I go insane.
It seems to me that there is everywhere an attempt at present.
That all you see.
That all you see. To me, that there is everywhere an attempt to present to divert attention from the actual influence which Kant exercised on German philosophy, and especially, fuck Kant though, by the way, German philosophy, and especially to ignore prudently the value which he set upon himself. Kant was first and foremost proud of his table of categories.
There's a reason he's named Kant and not Cam.
Yeah, categories with it in his hand.
Although,
he said,
are we going to read anything of Kant at some point?
Yeah. I mean, I want to read, like, all the philosophers.
Yeah.
This is the most difficult thing that could ever be undertaken on behalf of metaphysics. Let us only understand this could be. Also, once we read a lot of these philosophers, we should reread Nietzsche since he references them a lot.
Yeah.
And then, like, a better understanding and everything.
Right.
He was proud of having discovered
Proud!
a new faculty in man, the faculty of synthetic judgment a priori, granting that he deceived himself in this matter. The development and rapid flourishing of German philosophy depended nevertheless on his pride and on the eager rivalry of the younger generation to discover, if possible, something at all events new faculties of which to be still prouder. But let us reflect for a moment. It is high time to do so. How are synthetic judgments a priori possible? Kant asks himself, and what is really his answer? By means of a means, faculty. But unfortunately not in 5 words, but so circumstantially, imposingly, and with such display of German profundity and verbal flourishes that one altogether loses sight of the comical
Not gonna work here anymore anyway.
Not gonna work here anymore. Involved in such an answer. People were beside themselves with delight over this new faculty, and the jubilation reached its climax when Kant further discovered a moral faculty in man. Kant's moral judgments are like one of his weakest aspects of his philosophy. For at that time Germans were still moral, not yet dabbling in the politics of hard fact. Then came the honeymoon of German philosophy. All the young theologians of the Tübingen institution went immediately into the groves, all seeking for faculties, and what did they not find in that innocent, rich, and still youthful period of the German spirit to which Romanticism, the malicious fairy piped and sang, when one could not yet distinguish between finding and inventing. Above all, a faculty for the transcendental. Schelling christened it intellectual intuition, and thereby gratified the most earnest longings of the naturally pious, inclined Germans. One can do no greater wrong to the whole of this exuberant and eccentric movement, which was really youthfulness, notwithstanding that it disguised itself so boldly in hoary, and senile conceptions, than to take it seriously, or even like seriously. Anybody watches this, they're gonna be like, fucking, like, these guys have brain rot. Seriously, or even treat it with moral indignation enough. However, the world grew older, and the dream vanished. A time came when people rubbed their foreheads, and they still rub them today. People had been dreaming, and first and foremost, old Kant, by means of a means, faculty, he had said, or at least meant to say, But is that an answer, an explanation, or is it not rather merely a repetition of the question, how does opium induce sleep? By means of a means, faculty, namely the virtus dormitiva, replies the doctor.
Dinamite!
I'm not bothering reading this shit. It's not even in my language. Like, it's not even in English, so why the fuck bother? But such replies belong to the realm of comedy, and it is high time to replace the Kantian question, how are synthetic judgments a priori possible, by another question, why is belief in such judgments necessary? In effect, it is high time that we should understand that such judgments must be believed to be true for the sake of the preservation of creatures like ourselves, though they still might naturally be false judgments. Or more plainly spoken, and roughly and readily, synthetic judgments a priori should not be possible at all. We have no right to them in our mouths. They are nothing but false judgments. Only, of course, the belief in their truth is necessary, as plausible belief and ocular evidence belonging to the perspective view of life. And finally, to call to mind the enormous influence which German philosophy, I hope you understand, its right to inverted commas, goose feet, has exercised throughout the whole of Europe. There is no doubt that a certain virtus dormitiva had a share in it, thanks to German philosophy. It was a delight to the noble idlers, the virtuous, the mystics, the artists, the 3/4 Christians, and the political obscurantists.
What about the 3/5 Christians?
Obscurantists of all nations to find an antidote to the still overwhelming sensualism which overflowed from the last century into this, in short, sensus as superi. Fuck you. You can read 12,
Okay.
you piece of shit.
Someone by the name of Rabid Waffles, who I actually know about because I did a video responding to one of their videos 2 years back, which we will explain later. They comment, Valerie Flowers is the best YouTuber. I'm his biggest fan. He really entertains me with his videos. What a guy.
Hilarious and original. Hilarious and original. Hilarious and original. Hilarious and original.